What's up guys, I'm Dave Klein and welcome to my Dark Souls 3 lore series. Today we're going to talk about a royal family who perpetuated the linking of the flame and the prince who refused to do his duty. It's time to discuss Lothric and the royal family. The land of Lothric was ruled by King Oceiros and his queen. The Queen of Lothric, married to the former King Oceiros, was initially revered as a goddess of fertility and bounty. Meanwhile, the king himself was of the Royal Lothric Bloodline, as he eventually went mad trying to harness his royal blood for a greater purpose. Now it's worth noting that they weren't actually the founders of the Kingdom of Lothric. In fact, I believe it's likely Prince Lothric was named after a former Lothric ruler and the land itself. We can surmise this from the Hunter's Ring, which tells us that, for generations, rulers of Lothric have relied especially upon the Black Hunters to punish enemies in ways that the King's three pillars cannot. The Kingdom of Lothric had a system the rulers had established their kingdom around, this being their three pillars of rule. The King of Lothric would have knights, scholars, and a priestess who were all a part of his royal three pillars. The knights have long been considered one of the three pillars of the king's rule and were thus allowed to rear dragons. Meanwhile, the scholar is the master of the Grand Archives, and the high priestess also served as the prince's wet nurse. Finally, while not technically a part of the three pillars, as they were meant to be public-facing, the king had his hunters, or Black Hands. The hunters serve Lothric on the fringes and shadows. For generations, rulers of Lothric have relied especially upon the Black Hand hunters to punish enemies in ways the king's three pillars cannot. These hunters were assassins, and perhaps would employ the use of torture if necessary. The Black Hands wielded paired weapons, and were chosen for skill as opposed to royalty. Kamui, one such Black Hand, brought his blade, Onikiri, with him to the undead settlement, where he forged Ubadachi, and was finally prepared to join the ranks of the royal hunters. And, continuing the idea we know Oceiros didn't found the Kingdom of Lothric, Black Hand was a title established to honor hunters who served successive generations of kings. To date, no more than 3 such individuals have borne this distinction. What this essentially tells us is that in order to be named a Black Hand, you would have to have been an assassin in multiple kings' services. We also know that a Black Hand is the same as an assassin, as their armor set is the same, minus the Black Hand set including an additional cape and hat. And we know of at least 2 of these, Kamui and Gothard. Kamui looked after the prince, and it would seem he did so until his very end, as we find him guarding the bridge to where Prince Lothric resides. Meanwhile, Gothard rose quickly through the knighthood, which was no surprise to those who have witnessed his swordsmanship. However, unlike Kamui, something spurned him to flee the castle. It's not clear what this was, but it could perhaps be the circling pilgrim butterflies who eventually find their way to Lothric. It's unclear who the third Black Hand was, but there are a couple possibilities. Some have speculated that it could be Leonard, as he was born into royalty, which is believed to be the reason for his skill in both sorcery and swordsmanship, and because his dingy garb is in fact embroidered with gold thread, betraying its purpose as military wear designed for a noble. He also clearly has no qualms with assassination, as he joins Rosaria's covenant and serves her in assassinating others. That said, the Black Hands were known for wielding paired weapons, and while he'll dual-wield a shotell and a catalyst, these aren't paired weapons, lessening the likelihood of it being him. Not only this, but we find the Hunter's Ring off of a corpse in Lothric Castle right above the entrance to the Royal Archives prison cage, so it could be as simple as the corpse wearing the Hunter's Ring is the third and final Black Hand. While there were multiple generations of royals in the Lothric line, the story of Dark Souls 3 takes place during the rule of Oceiros. He and the Queen of Lothric had 3 known children, Lothric, Lorian, and Ocelot. Lorian, the eldest son, became a great warrior. He was a knight who single-handedly slayed the demon prince, but the victory eternally scorched his sword with flame. Lothric, the second prince, was a prince destined to be a Lord of Cinder and cherished by the royal family despite being born into illness, a frail and shriveled child. Lothric and Lorian are known as the twin princes, and as such, I believe Lorian the eldest was destined to become a knight and the eventual heir to the throne. Meanwhile, Lothric, the younger twin, would take on the prestigious duty of linking the flame and honoring the Lothric bloodline. Finally, their youngest born was Ocelot, a child we know very little about. The Lothric bloodline was obsessed with creating a worthy heir, and when this proved impossible, resorted to unspeakable means. Suffice it to say, the path to linking the fire is a cursed one indeed. Oceiros and the Queen seem to be no different, but why? And how did this notion of linking the fire become so important? Well, this would lead us to the very foundation of the Kingdom of Lothric. Looking at the sorcery soulstream, it was a sorcery imparted by the first of the scholars when Lothric and the Grand Archives were but young. And who were these first scholars who helped found Lothric? Well, there's one set of statues in the Royal Archives that could answer that question for us.
Chosen undead, your fate is to succeed the great Lord Gwyn, so that you may link the fire, cast away the dark, and undo the curse of the undead.
Lining the Royal Archives, one of the first fixtures in the Kingdom of Lothric are statues of the primordial serpents from Dark Souls 1. I believe Frompt had audience with the founders of Lothric and was among the first scholars of the ever-important three pillars that served as the foundation of the kingdom. Kingseeker Frompt pushed the linking of the fire, which would be indicative of the Lothric bloodline's obsession with creating a worthy heir. Not only this, but Firelink Shrine is connected to Lothric Castle and clearly an important part of it. A Lord Vessel can be found in the high wall of Lothric Castle itself, the untended graves, and of course in Firelink Shrine. They seem to be the family who are the keepers and protectors of the flame. In fact, it seems the tradition we find throughout Firelink Shrine of firekeepers and unkindled were based from the royal family of Lothric. Beyond the multitude of Lord Vessels we find throughout Lothric, we can also take a look at the Shrine Handmaid who resides in Firelink Shrine. In Lothric, the High Priestess has long been considered one of the three pillars in the king's rule. While we know Emma is the High Priestess of Lothric Castle, she looks similar to the Shrine Handmaid who we find in Firelink Shrine, but with less torn up clothes and sits in the same chair. While these are voiced by two different voice actresses due to their similarities, I believe it's likely the Shrine Handmaid was a former High Priestess of Lothric Castle, while Emma is simply the current High Priestess. The Shrine Handmaid not only sells the Priestess Ring, but drops it if you kill her, indicating to me at some point she was the High Priestess. The Unkindled, too, seems to be a part of the cyclical nature the royal family has been watching over. When given an Ashen Estus ring, once a treasure brought before Lothric's queen, she had it enshrined in the Cemetery of Untended Graves so that one day an Unkindled might profit from its use. There is a grave in Lothric that sees no visitors, a dark place where rootless warriors rest. The Queen of Lothric alone cared to wish these poor souls good fortune. And while the nature of these cycles seemed to go on for centuries, what happened? Well, the link may lie within Gertrude and a certain scholar of Lothric. Gertrude was a holy maiden to the queen. The heavenly daughter is said to be the queen's child. It's unclear if she was also the king's child, or perhaps the queen's illegitimate child, but I'm leaning towards the latter. She has a direct connection to Gwynevere, the holy daughter of Gwyn, as both miracles, and specifically the miracle Bountiful Light, are linked to her, which was originally a miracle linked to Gwynevere. Special miracle granted to the maidens of Gwynevere, princess of the sun. The miracles of Gwynevere, the princess cherished by all, grant their blessing to a great many warriors. Gertrude was visited by an angel who revealed the miracle divine pillars of light to her. Despite losing both her sight and voice, she was determined to record the tale. Ordinary men cannot decipher her fragmentary scrawl, nor comprehend how it became the foundation of the angelic faith of Lothric. Gertrude managed to spread the gospel of her faith throughout Lothric, which seemed counter to the beliefs of the Lothric elite. And if she was indeed an illegitimate child of the queen's, this would be even worse. The worship became so widespread that there became winged knights who were named for their appearance and swore themselves to the angels. Worship of the divine messengers was viewed as heresy in Lothric and unrecognized by any of the three pillars of rule. This is believed to be why Gertrude, the heavenly daughter, Gwynevere was imprisoned in the lofty cell of the Grand Archives. We find a corpse in the Grand Archives which is implied to be Gertrude's. The cell is guarded by 3 winged knights, and the body itself contains the miracle divine pillars of light. Along the cell, we find white feathers spread out near the corpse, akin to a fallen angel, which directly connects to Prince Lothric's chamber, which we find covered in the very same feathers. So, what exactly happened? We know Gertrude and Lothric are linked by these feathers, and the Lothric bloodline was obsessed with creating a worthy heir, and when this proved impossible, resorted to unspeakable means. As my buddy Terramath has pointed out in his 10 Things About Dark Souls 3 video, as Gertrude was clearly linked to Gwynevere and her bloodline, it's very possible the royal family did unspeakable things to her in order to create a worthy heir. This could have backfired on them and instead cursed their children. Young Lothric was meant to be a champion, but some things will remain distant dreams forever. Now that is a fair bit of speculation, but what I'm leaning towards at the moment. As they were having trouble creating a worthy heir, their next hope laid with Ocelot. Oceiros turned towards the dragons, and Oceiros went mad trying to harness his royal blood for a greater purpose, leading him to the heretics of the Grand Archives, where he discovered the twisted worship of Seath the Pale Drake. Here he slowly went insane, similar to Big Hat Logan before him. The late King Oceiros became obsessed by dragons to the extent that he would later be known as the Consumed King.
Ah, you ignorant slaves. Finally taken notice, have you? Of the power of my beloved Ocelot, child of dragons. Well, I will not give him up, for he is all that I have.
Oceiros cradles in his arm an imaginary baby, having completely lost himself. Meanwhile, after giving birth to Ocelot, the Queen of Lothric's youngest, she quietly disappeared. As for Lothric and Lorian, the first of the scholars doubted the linking of the fire and was alleged to be a private mentor to the royal prince. One of the first scholars and one of the royal pillars seemed to convince Lothric against linking the fire. And who was the first scholar? It could be that Koth, the other primordial serpent from Dark Souls 1, also helped found Lothric with Frompt.
I seek to right the wrongs of the past, to discover our true lord.
Although I believe he has a much stronger influence over the land of Londor. This could be referring to Dark Souls 2's Scholar of the First Sin, Aldia, as there's another statue along the Grand Archives which might resemble Aldia. I think the most likely explanation of the first scholar comes from Reddit users Hutoto and Yarnum's Finest One. This scholar could be Pontiff Sullivan. His clothing resembles the scholars of the Grand Archives. Meanwhile, the sorcery, Soulstream, which describes the first of the scholars doubted the linking of the fire, is found behind a hidden wall in the scholars' Grand Archives and guarded by none other than one of the Pontiff's Outrider Knights. Not only this, but both Vort of the Boreal Valley and the Dancer of the Boreal Valley, Outrider Knights controlled by the Pontiff's eyes, block the Unkindled's passage to both the Undead Settlement and Lothric Castle itself. The Dancer of the Boreal Valley being a distant daughter of the former royal family whose soul can be transposed into soothing sunlight, a miracle of Gwynevere, and possibly connecting her to Gertrude. Regardless of who it was, Lothric was convinced not to link the flame.
One, purloiner of cinders. Mind you, the mantle of Lord interests me none. The fire-linking curse, the legacy of lords, let it all fade into nothing. You've done quite enough. Now have your rest.
As for Lorian, the eldest, I believe as twins, he and Lothric had a strong connection for one another and may have loved one another. Lorian, raised as a knight, is said to have been left mute and crippled by his younger brother's curse. It is also said that Lorian, in fact, wished it so. When defeating Lothric, you receive the soul of the twin princes as opposed to Lothric's soul, which describes the two princes rejected their duty to become Lords of Cinder and settled far, far away to watch the fire fade from a distance. A curse makes their souls nearly inseparable. You can also combine their two swords to create the Twin Prince's Greatsword, a sword forged from the reunion of the inseparable swords born from the souls of Lothric and Lorian, twin princes. And, in the end, cursed and convinced the cycle of fire is all for naught, the two princes chose to break their family tradition and watch the fire fade, the kingdom below tearing apart as the dark set in and pus of man started to spread. With the fire fading and the spreading pus of man tainting the castle, the Grand Archives closed its doors for good, thus creating the start of Dark Souls 3, and the entire reason an Unkindled would be required to rise and force their cinders into place. Alright guys, that wraps up this lore video. I hope you guys enjoyed, and definitely let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Recently, I had the opportunity to provide VO for an amazing Bloodborne animation by Linus Almroth and be in a Hunger Games PvP video by Terramantis, both of which I'd recommend checking out. As always, you can catch up on my Dark Souls 3 lore by watching my Dark Souls 1 lore series, or check out my previous Dark Souls 3 lore videos, or, you know, check out my comedy super shows, cause why not? And I'll see you guys next time. Peace. Your name is not Dunrick. But my name is Dunrick. It's not, stop the editing, stop! Shuei Yoshida, Sony Computer Entertainment's head of product development, concluded, "This is crap. This is an unbelievably bad game."